Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you. Last week was birthday week.
January starts in the middle of the month and doesn't ease up until sometime in February.
Right, but the two of us and two of our
Kids.
sons, we have birthdays every other day for like a week. They're in the middle of January. It's interesting.
15, 17, 19, and 21. The day in between, and then so January is birthday month, but it's also known as
divorce month.
Divorce month, which
I
was
was talking about that today. Yeah.
Right. January is known as divorce month, and I didn't know that for some reason, because there's a spike in divorces after the holidays.
Right.
And as you said when we were preparing this, that people want to get through the holidays. They don't want to be going through a divorce and separation at holiday time, so they wait until after the holidays, and then they begin the new year.
Right.
With plans for separation and divorce.
Right. Absolutely. Sometimes the things that happen over the course of the holidays is sort of the cause or the final straw, if you will, for kind of proceeding with that. But yes, a lot of times parents, couples will separate in the month of January, and start that arduous process of divorce, which can take a long time. And so today we're going to talk about the idea of having a child-centered divorce. And
that's right.
Because even though a large number of relationships and marriages end in divorce, we know from whether it's the ACEs studies or lots of other research over the past decades, however many decades, has demonstrated that if we're not careful, the process of a divorce can have long-standing consequences to kids. I think what we're finding out is that it doesn't have to. It's not necessarily going to cause a long-standing problems with kids, and there is some debate as to whether or not some of the issues leading up to the divorce are the real problem. Is some of the actual issues that cause the problems for the kids. But we do know that kids of divorce are at risk for issues later on in life as well.
Right. Yeah, because we should mention that in addition to being divorce month, January is also known as International Child-Centered Divorce Awareness Month. And so there's this internationally, but you're right. You and I have both been through a divorce, mine many years ago. And one of the concerns that I had was, what is the effect of divorce on children? I had one son at the time, young, 7 years old. And that was my main concern, is what is this going to do to him? Well, there's in the literature, sort of the rule of thumb is, divorce is better than a bad marriage. It's better for children to go through a divorce than it is for them to witness a bad marriage. And the other thing you hear is that children are resilient. Right. Well, maybe they're resilient. They may not be as resilient as we once thought, because divorce can have a devastating impact on kids, and frequently parents aren't even aware of it, of the difficulties that their children are going through, because, as you said, the problem started before the marriage came apart. Right. I mean, there was probably arguments and disagreements and that the kids were witnessing before the divorce. Then there's all the rancor during the divorce, and then there's adjustments after the divorce. So remember, kids are going through three phases that are related to a divorce, and it can be a very, very tumultuous, very difficult time for kids. And so what we want to talk about today is, is there such a thing, and can there be such a thing as a child-centered divorce?
Absolutely. And with those three phases, the concern that we have as mental health professionals that work with kids who have been through some of these issues is that so often, we have to remind adults to be adults. We have to remind parents to be adults after the divorce, because all of the fighting and all of the issues that led up to the separation and divorce so often continue during the divorce and then even after the divorce. And it's like you just want to say, it's over. You're not married anymore. You don't have to keep fighting like this. And we're going to talk about some of that stuff as we're going through the stuff today. But I strongly and firmly believe in this idea of a child-centered divorce, where you recognize that the couple recognizes that they can't be together anymore, but they still have the job of being co-parents and raising the children, even though if they're not living in the same home and they're not in a relationship together. So, it is an important perspective that we need parents to have.
Right. Yeah. For parents, for couples who have never been through a divorce before, they're usually surprised at how difficult it is once they enter the legal system, because the legal system is something that most of us don't know anything about. And so you're discovering it as you go along. But divorce is, on average, a divorce will take 2 years.
Right.
And that's what the divorce attorneys will tell you, that this process moves slowly. COVID has slowed the process even more because courts don't have the same pacing that they had prior to the pandemic. But divorce can be a long, rancorous, difficult, gut-wrenching at least 2 year experience. Mm-hmm. And for many couples, it's much more than that. So we say it's an average of 2 years, but it's not unusual for a divorce to go on for 3 or 4 or 5 years, depending on the complexity, usually the assets, and the number of children and other considerations. So it's a years-long process, and it is a gut-wrenching emotional process. And what happens is, parents, all these emotions are involved in a divorce, and parents begin to focus on themselves, taking care of themselves, and they frequently forget about taking care of the children.
Right.
But the children are probably having the most difficult time of anybody involved in this divorce. The parents have some control because at least they have an attorney. The kids have no control.
Right.
So here's this emotional turmoil, this emotional hurricane swirling around them, and they have absolutely no control over any of it. And they're just told what to do, and they have to comply. You have to do this and you have to do this, with absolutely no control over anything. And so in many ways, it's the children have the most difficult time going through a divorce and adjusting to life after the divorce.
Right. Yeah. And so when we think about when a couple is going through a divorce, there are many things, there are many losses. Not only the loss of the relationship itself, but there are sort of these other losses that we don't always think about ahead of time. Like, you're going to potentially lose some friends.
Right.
You have all of the possessions in the house, and but I think that one of the biggest things is the loss of tradition.
Right.
When you have a background of, every Christmas you go to your in-laws' house, and now that's not happening.
Right.
That kind of shift and adjustment can be difficult if we're not prepared for it.
That's right. And you have the loss of assets. I mean, typically assets are going to be divided equally. Most judges and lawyers don't care who gets what, as long as it's about even. So we look for about a 50-50 division of assets. And so you're going to lose assets, you're going to lose traditions, you're going to lose possessions, things that you really care about, and the partner's going to get those things. And your friends will also divide up. Some of your friends will side with you, and some of your friends will side with your wife. And so there'll be divided loyalties, and you'll end up with some and they'll. So one of the emotions that you will experience is loss. Okay?
Right.
A second is anxiety and fear.
Right. Absolutely. And it's very often that, you know, when we think about, again, January sort of being divorce month, one of the big issues and big concerns that people have that create some of these anxieties and fears is finances.
Exactly.
You know, to be, if we're very, very direct about some things, many times people stay in unhealthy relationships simply because of financial insecurity. This is especially the case for many women who are either stay-at-home moms or otherwise homemakers, or you know, we don't have to remind everyone that, you know, women tend to make less in the workplace despite doing the same jobs and having the same experience and everything as men. They tend to make less money, and so that financial insecurity it can lead to, you know, many women staying in relationships much longer than they intended or want to. And so once that divorce begins, that whole process begins, that significant increase in anxiety and fear can take over.
That's right. For many women, if they haven't, even if they've been out of the workforce for a couple of years, that's a long time today, because of the changes that occur in computer programs. You know, if you're not using a program for 3 or 4 years, you become obsolete. And so women take time off for child rearing, and all of a sudden they go through a divorce and they're at a huge financial disadvantage. They just can't re-enter the workforce at a high salary. Most women can't. I mean, some can, but and face it, women continue to be the primary caregivers, especially with very young children. So for women, it's always going to be two jobs. They're going to continue to to be the primary caretaker of the children, and now they have to go to work full time. Many women have to go to work full time.
Absolutely. But other sources of anxiety and fear are, you know, is the whole idea of starting a new life. You know, especially the longer the marriage was, the more difficult this can be, because you know you have these, again, traditions and these, you know, these routines and these long-standing processes that you've been following. Now all of a sudden you have to do everything new and find new ways to do it, and many times that's alone. You're doing that alone. It can be really difficult for people.
Right. If you can imagine a 15 or 20-year marriage, there's a lot of traditions that develop over time. Holidays and birthdays and vacations, especially if you've done the same things year after year after year, and then suddenly that's all gone. Just immediately, everything is gone, and you have to build a completely new life. And that, for many people, can be a very scary proposition.
Absolutely. And then, you know, sort of this third area of strong emotion is anger. You know, you know, sometimes divorces happen because one person from the marriage wants the divorce. Sometimes the other person doesn't want the divorce.
Exactly.
Sometimes they're both wanting the divorce, but all of that can lead to you know, it becoming such an adversarial process that, you know, somebody is concerned about the other person winning, or you know, you can you know, he just gets what he wants, and, you know, then the other person being happy. So you mentioned earlier that we've both been through divorce. I went through my divorce within the last couple of years, and it's so difficult because sometimes this is just perception. You know, where the partner sees the other person and thinks, oh, well, they're, you know, living it up, they're just enjoying their life, and it just breeds this unhappiness, this anger, and all of that can make the process so much more difficult for both people, just because, you know, if you weren't happy in the marriage, sometimes being out of the relationship is just going to make you happier than you were before. And that's just a normal process. But yes, that that perception of happiness from the other partner in the divorce can lead to a lot of anger.
That's right. And I think of these three emotions, the first, loss, the second is fear and anxiety, and the third is anger. Anger, of course, can be the most toxic and destructive.
Right.
It's especially difficult, as you say, if you see your partner's being happier. Oh, now she's happy, she's got her life, and I'm miserable now. Or, oh yeah, he has a new life, he has a girlfriend, he has a new apartment, and so he gets to move on with his life, and I'm stuck in poverty and taking care of his children. That's frequently what we hear. Right. So you get this feeling that the other person is now happy, that they're okay, so that produces anger. Or the other person is winning, he has all the assets and he has a high-paying job, and I'm left with nothing. I don't have as much, and I can't earn as much, and so I'm at a distinct financial disadvantage. Okay, that's another, and that your options are limited. That somehow your partner now is opening up a whole new life for himself or herself, but your options are very limited because you have all the responsibility of taking care of the children or the pets or the house or whatever. And right. So that sense that one partner is getting more can produce anger, and anger can become a very toxic and very destructive emotion in the divorce.
Right, absolutely. And so when a person is going through a divorce and experiencing all of these different emotions, and rarely do we experience just one of them. Many times we experience all three of them. When you're going through those and experiencing them, and when you take all three of those together and you think about what we're really talking about, we're talking about grief. You're
right.
going through the grief process because you've lost something.
Right.
Right. You've lost the dream of what you hoped that the marriage would have been, the future life that you had hoped that you would have. And so you're experiencing a loss just as you would, if it was a death in the family or something like that. And so when you're going through all of these things, one of the natural tendencies that we have is to start to focus on ourselves. We start to focus on our own needs, and dealing with our own anger and dealing with our own grief. But that takes us away from focusing on the kids many times. And it puts us into situations where we're making decisions that make us feel good, but may make things more difficult for the kids.
That's right. And what couples need to be careful about is, as they focus on their own emotions and their own needs, whether it's, and it is a grief process, okay, you're going to go through a grief process. When you start, as the adults begin to focus on themselves and the legal process that they have to go through, as gut-wrenching as that is, you have to factor in what we call the emotional intensity.
Right.
How raw, how difficult, how intense are the emotions? And there are several factors that will determine how emotionally intense a particular divorce will be. For example, emotions are less intense if the spouses agree that perhaps it's a good idea that we end this marriage. It's not working for either one of us. Perhaps the time has come. And so if the couples agree, if each partner agrees, the emotions tend to be less intense.
Absolutely. And it's also less intense when it's just the couple. There are no children involved. That makes it much less intense. But then when one of the partners is ready for the relationship to be over sooner than the other is, so one partner is ready to move forward with the process of divorce, and the other is still sort of holding on to some hope or some idea that the relationship will resolve. That can cause a lot of that emotional intensity to increase.
Right, because not only is the marriage coming apart, this what you assumed would be your life, but you're also losing this person.
Right.
And that's that grief process that we talk about, that
Right.
you weren't ready for this. People frequently say, I really got blindsided by this. I didn't see this coming.
Right.
I had no idea. And suddenly there's this gut-wrenching awareness that your partner, whom you thought was with you, that you were a couple, suddenly is gone and may have left the marriage long before you were aware of it.
Right.
And so that creates an emotional turmoil that many people have a really difficult time managing the intensity of those emotions, the loss and the anger and the grief that you feel when a person just suddenly walks out of your life. It's especially difficult with marriages of some duration. We see couples who have been married for 35 or 40 years, and one of the partners leaves. It's unimaginable to many people that I've been doing this for 40 years and suddenly it's over.
Right.
And you don't have another 30 or 40 years to build a new life.
Right. No, absolutely. And kind of building on that is we talked a minute ago about the idea of seeing the other person as winning.
That's right.
That too can really increase that emotional intensity, simply because, if you feel the other person is winning, that typically means that you feel like you're losing, and that's going to churn up a lot of emotion.
That's right. So as you enter this separation divorce process, keep in mind that there are going to be very strong emotions, and we have to do everything we can to keep the emotions as cool as possible. We don't want the emotions. We say to people, we don't want your emotions to control you. We want you to control your emotions. Right. And it's the same thing with the divorce. We don't want emotions, these very hot emotions, to drive the process. We want the process to continue, but we have to control the emotional intensity while the process is working its way to completion.
Right. And so this is especially the case when there's children involved, because when there are kids involved, when there are no kids involved, people tend to go through the divorce process much easier. There's still a lot of those emotions, a lot of those feelings, and a lot of that anger and everything. But when there's kids involved, this should change everything. This should change the entire process that we undergo when we're going through a divorce, because, it is so difficult to understand how significant some people change in their perspective of the other person's parenting as soon as a divorce process begins.
Right.
6 months ago, when you were married and living together and we weren't talking about a divorce, you were perhaps perfectly fine with your spouse's parenting. You were perfectly willing to leave the kids home alone with your spouse, and you didn't think twice about doing some of those things. But now all of a sudden that you're getting a divorce, all of those things are a problem. You have an issue with the kids staying home with the other parents, and all these things. So what we want, as far as a child-centered divorce goes, we want to begin with the idea and remembering that both parents love their children. Both parents want the children to adjust well, and they both want the kids to make it through the divorce process and live happy lives and understand a healthy relationship. I know that you have, and I've talked lots of times to parents who are divorcing. And, one of the things we remind them is that, we want our kids to see healthy relationships. And if the relationship that you had before wasn't healthy, that's not benefiting them at all. And so if we have to go through this divorce process, let's go through it in a healthy way so that the kids can come out of it understanding how to communicate, understanding how important a healthy relationship is, so that they too later in their life can have a relationship that's healthy.
Right. One of the key aspects of divorce is division of assets.
Right.
And so parents, who gets the 401k, and who gets the house, and who gets the boat, and who gets the beach house. And there's a lot of fighting about that. But parents need to remember that their most valuable asset is their children. I mean, of all the things that you're going to deal with in this divorce, the most valuable asset is your children. And that's why we encourage people to put their children first, take care of the kids first. The other advantage is that if you're putting your children first, and if you're making decisions based on what is truly best for the children, you take some of the pressure off yourself. That I have to get this, or I have to get this, or I have to get this. If both parents approach the divorce with the attitude that our children are the most important asset, and we have to focus on their well-being, not our own well-being, you're going to have your emotions, but it's time to think of the children. Put the children at the center of this divorce.
Absolutely.
And I think we believe that things will go better if you put the children in the center of the divorce. Berney, you make a wonderful point when you say 6 months prior to the divorce, nobody was concerned about the children being with the dad or the mom.
Right.
Okay. And suddenly you go through a divorce and we talk about, well, I don't know that it's in the best interest of the children to spend, well, it was in the best interest of the children prior to the divorce. Why isn't it after the divorce? That's where emotions start to wreak havoc in the process. So put the children at the center. They are your most valuable asset.
Right. When we say at the center, we mean as it relates to decision making, not that they are informed about everything that's going on with the divorce, and not that they are, that we include them as part of the decision making necessarily. There is absolutely no benefit to, your 8, 9, 10-year-old, sometimes 12, 13, 14-year-old, to know everything that's happening as it relates to the mediation or the agreements that, or whatever you're working on with your attorney. There's no benefit to your kids to knowing that. What we mean by putting them at the center is making decisions that are going to be healthy for them. Even if it, sometimes even if it makes it a little bit more difficult for yourself, if it makes things easier for them, you can cope with it. It's more difficult for them because, as you said at the beginning, they're the ones who really have no control. They're the ones who really have no decision making as it relates to.
Right. Yeah. One of the most painful things is for children to be told, no, you have to spend this much time, or you have to do this, or you have to do that. And it puts children in a terrible, terrible position. And it doesn't have to be that restrictive if the parents enter with this child-centered approach. If you want to be at your mom's, it's okay. Your birthday party, you want to go to it's okay.
Right.
That we don't make it so restrictive. So by keeping the focus on the welfare of the children, for example, the children have to have health insurance. They have to see a dentist. They have to keep up with their immunizations. They're maybe going to go to college. They're still in school. They have to do well in school. And so all those decisions are financial decisions.
Right.
What about the college fund? What about insurance? All those things should be done for the children. Not what's best for me, but what did the children need?
Right. So as we think about this child-centered divorce, there are several steps, and I think as we get into these steps, it's important to recognize again that we're making decisions that are best for the kids. Parents sometimes get caught up in details that matter far less than what you think that they matter. Again, just as a quick example of something that we work with divorcing parents so frequently with, that parents just get really hung up on, is time. If it's a 50-50 split with time sharing, but it's dad's weekend, but he's going to be out of town working. And so mom has to have that weekend, and now we're arguing and fighting about, mom had the kids for 5 hours more than dad had the kids, so we got to find 5 more hours for dad to take over the kids. Those details, I've worked with couples who are down to like the 15-minute mark. It's like he spent 30 more minutes with the kids this week because he didn't drop them off on time, and so I need that 30 minutes back, so I'm going to keep them 30 more.
Which has nothing to do with the children.
Right. It has nothing to do with the kids. And it certainly isn't looking at what's best for the kids, because it's just increasing stress. It's increasing arguments and confrontation. You know, the amount of time, the number of minutes matters far less than what you're actually doing with the time. Because when you're in those situations and you say, okay, what are you going to do for those 30 minutes, those 30 extra minutes that you're going to keep the kids to make at the time? You know, they're playing video games, or they're, you know, they're getting ready to go. It's not like time that you're spending with them. It's just time that they're in your house. And that doesn't matter nearly as much when it comes down to either that or, you know, all the arguing and fighting and bickering. So, but when we think about this child-centered approach with some of that stuff in mind, you know, there's 4 things that we want to think about. And the first thing is, for goodness sake, stay out of court.
Do your best to stay out of court.
Right. You know, using mediation, collaborative approaches is so much better, because it takes us away from that adversarial approach. I mean, court is adversarial. Right. There's no other way to think about it.
That's right. That's the system that has evolved. It is an adversarial relationship. Many parents, and they're often surprised when I say, well, you don't have to litigate this divorce. Right. So there are 4 ways to get divorced. You can mediate. I mean, first of all, you can agree just between the 2 of you. If you don't have any children and you don't have a lot of assets, just go to the courthouse and file your own paperwork. Okay? Right. So you can do it yourself. A friend of mine did that. He and his wife were in their 20s. They were in graduate school, and they decided to get divorced. And they went down to the courthouse, and it cost $150 to process the paperwork. Okay. And they were divorced. They agreed on division of property. There were no children involved. Right. Each one got a car, and they walked away from each other. Okay. Right. You can also mediate. There are mediators in every city, and they will walk you through your divorce. And again, if you don't have a lot of assets and you basically agree, that's a second way to get divorced. Okay. Right. Then there's collaborative divorce, which is a child-centered process. Right. We could go into that in more detail. And the most expensive is litigation. You know, that you hire attorneys and you pay large amounts of money for their time, for phone calls, for letters. Every request you make is billed. Then you have to go to court, and that takes more time. And that's the most expensive way to get divorced. It is also the most contentious, and it also creates the most animosity between the 2 couples, because it's a win-lose proposition.
Right. And it's also the most common, because that's the process that so many people tend to follow, even though there are so many other ways that it could be far easier. But you're right. The more that we go to court, the more that everything is litigated. And some couples we know litigate everything.
That's right.
Every decision is to the court or goes through the attorneys, and it just creates more parental conflict. And it's really the last thing that you want if you're trying to co-parent with someone, because it just maintains conflict and maintains animosity. So
that's right. So if you're trying to use a child-centered approach, do all you can not to litigate. You need professional advice. You know, if you're going through a divorce, you have to know what the laws are. So you need professional advice from an attorney, from a divorce family law attorney. But you don't have to litigate and go to court. Right. You can have all that advice short of litigation.
Absolutely. Which leads us right into the second one, which is to focus on recovery, not on revenge or even the idea of justice. You know, there really is no justice to it. I mean, the relationship didn't work. And the justice is that we recognize that the relationship's not working and we're going to separate. And so we're not going to keep fighting and arguing anymore. Otherwise, you know, the focus should be on recovery, thinking about what you want the future to look like and working to that. You know, ideally, when a couple divorces, they maintain the same goals as it relates to their parenting and what they want for their kids. They may have different ideas as to what they want to be doing in their life and some of those other kinds of things, but they both want their kids to be happy. They both want their kids to do well. So what do we need to do to make that happen?
Right.
And of course, we're not fighting about everything. That certainly helps.
That's right. Because you're going to have a future.
Right.
There is life after divorce. Okay. So you begin with this relationship is over. Okay. But what do you want your future to look like? Do you want it to be peaceful? Do you want it to be, do you want a collaborative, cooperative relationship with your partner, with your ex spouse, or do you want to continue fighting? What future do you want? And the second thing is, what do you want your children to say about this divorce? And you have to constantly remind yourself that the children are observing and they're remembering, they're making memories of this time. And what do you want your children to say about the divorce? And one of the things that I think all parents would want is that the children say, you carried the burden of this so that I didn't have to.
Right.
Okay. You tolerated all this emotion so that I didn't have to.
Right.
And the second thing is that you want your children to feel loved and to feel safe with both of you. Okay. And so you have to model that behavior. You know, we talk about modeling the behavior. You have to model that behavior because you are going to have a future and your children are going to be judging how you perform during this divorce.
Right. Yeah. And remember that the more that your kids know about it, you know, we need to carry the burden because the more that they know about all the arguments, about all the proposals and disagreements and fights about different things, all of those things are harmful to the kids.
Right.
And, you know, we want them to focus on being kids and in adapting and adjusting to this idea of two homes.
Right.
And let them work on that part. Let them focus on that and focus on being kids. We don't need to be sharing any of those other things with them because that's just harmful to them.
That's right. The kids don't need to know about the legal financial plans that you're making. It doesn't do. They have no control of it. They can't do anything about it.
Right.
All they can do is worry. All they can do is watch you get angry about those things. And so just leave them out of that part of it. Absolutely. There is one exception to that. If a child has a fundamental misunderstanding, for example, your father isn't paying enough child support. Right. That's the reason we can't do anything. That's the reason we can't go on vacation because your father isn't doing this. That needs to be clarified. That's a misstatement. That's a factual misstatement because in fact the father is paying his share as was agreed to in the divorce agreement. And so that may require some clarification, but again, both parents need to be involved in that clarification. It can't become another point of contention.
Right. Yeah. And again, we're talking about if both parents are working in this child-centered approach. You know, obviously there are those who don't pay their fair share or pay their part or take care of those responsibilities. And if that's the case, then like you said, that needs to be a discussion that things need to happen with that. But from the legal side of that, that's not something that the kids need to be involved in. You know, right. We have to be mindful that every statement that we make is heard. And so when we say, if you're working from a child-centered approach and you say, well, we can't do that because, you know, dad didn't pay child support this time, know that you're planting a seed that dad is the bad guy.
Right. That's right.
And that's not the child-centered approach that we're wanting. Yes, the kids may overhear that. Yes, as the kids get older, they're going to recognize that that's the case, that may be going on. And we need to clarify that. We need to address those issues. But you know, we don't need to be making those kinds of statements because that's just going to create more conflict.
And you can only have that with an older child, you know, right. With a teenager. You can't have this discussion with a 7 or 8 year old because it doesn't make any difference to them. So it wouldn't be if you had teenagers and they had a misunderstanding, then you have to try to clarify it. But if you use a child-centered approach, that's not going to happen anyway, right? Because that's a form of alienation. The second thing parents should not do is to use their children for support.
Right.
If you need to talk to somebody, if you need to unload, go to your friends, go to relatives, hire a professional. Don't use your friends. No, don't use your children for emotional support.
Right.
That's one of the worst things you can do, is rely on them, because you're immediately going to enter the world of the other person is wrong in some way.
Right, which kind of brings us to that third step, which is focusing on your relationship with your children. Your relationship is a parent-child relationship. It's not a friend-friend relationship, and so you need to avoid those traps of using your child as the confidant, using your child as the messenger. You know, your child is your child, and you need to focus and work on that relationship and avoid some of that other stuff, because you said this at the beginning. Sometimes kids aren't quite as resilient as we think they are.
That's
and
right.
We need to make sure that we're nurturing that resilience, because some of these things that we're talking about avoiding, if you continue to do those things, it whittles away that resilience very, very quickly.
That's right. Right. And the kids will respond. Typically, kids will respond in a couple of ways. One is that they'll hide their true feelings. They know that their parents are struggling, and so they will hide their true feelings because they don't want to burden their parents.
Right.
Okay. What a horrible thing to do to a child.
Right.
A child can't have the emotions that they're experiencing, or they can't display them because they're protecting the adults whom they know are struggling. So you can't burden your children with your feelings.
Right. Kids are going to say what they think you want to hear. So, your kids come back from dad's house. If they know that you're really unhappy with dad, they're going to say things that are going to be consistent with you being unhappy with dad. But recognize that they're probably doing the same thing the other way. And so this is where we get into a lot of those conflicts, because, well, the kids say that they don't really like this about dad's house, and dad will say, well, the kids say they really don't like this about mom's house. It's not that any of that stuff is true or not true. It's just that the kids don't need to be in that situation because they're part of the conflict.
We have all dealt with this. A child knows that it doesn't matter which way it works. A child knows that his parents are in an adversarial relationship. The parents hate each other. Right. Kids know that. The child goes to the dad's house, has a good time, but when he comes home, he can't say, oh, we had a great time at dad's, because the kid knows that mom hates dad.
Right.
So they say, oh, we hated it, he did this and he did that. Then frequently the mother or the dad, it doesn't matter, will say, oh, well, you're not safe at your dad's. You don't like going there. So we have to deal with it. And so the child is trying to protect the parent, but the parent interprets it as, you're not happy at your dad's, you don't want to go there anymore. And now you've created a whole new set of problems for everybody, because the kid's not really unhappy at dad's, but he's trying to sell that idea to mom. Right. Or vice versa.
Trying to mediate his excitement or happiness or whatever a little bit. And, but they can also act out. Sometimes we see kids acting out and having a lot of behavioral issues as a result. So when it comes to your kids' behavior, and things that they say, not that they're being dishonest, it's that they're working to control or to mediate your emotions and your reactions to things. And so we have to be mindful of that and avoid some of those pitfalls. But the last step is sometimes one of the most challenging, because as you're going through the process, you started out, as we started this podcast, you mentioned that sometimes this process can take a long time, on average 2 years.
Right.
While you don't want to rush the process, you certainly don't want to drag it out either. The recovery process starts once things are done, because as long as there's conflict and this adversarial, issues continue. And so you want the recovery process to begin, and the recovery process can take a little while sometimes. But recognize that recovery can't happen fully until all the knots are untied, right? When couples still remain connected, over this long period of time because of their arguing, because of their fighting, because one person doesn't want to let go and the other person is ready to go. For all of these, the more enmeshed the couple remains, the more confusing it is for the kids.
Right. That's right. One of the things that couples need to remember is that you don't begin to recover until the divorce has been signed and it is at the courthouse and has been approved. Right. It's not until that step occurs. As long as you're still negotiating, as long as you're still arguing, you are very much married to each other. Okay, you're still very, very connected. Right. It's not until there is this legal document, and it's just the way it is, that the recovery, the real recovery can begin. And recovery can take up to 5 years. Parents don't believe that. Parents who are beginning the process don't believe it. Parents who are going through the process realize that, yeah, it could take me 3 or 4 or 5 years to really uncouple, to really disconnect. Because what are you doing? It's what you said. You're untying the knots. You're bound to each other by retirement accounts, by bank accounts, by addresses, by friends and family, by children, by pets. You're connected to each other, and you gradually have to undo all those connections. Okay. If you have children, that connection never gets broken. You're always going to be connected. I mean, eventually your kids are going to get married. You're both going to the wedding. Okay. Right. So you're going to stay connected in that area. But it's not until you completely unravel. I see parents who have been divorced for 3 or 4 years where one partner is still arguing about how or what decision the other parent's making, right? About what school the child, not even important stuff. It's like what sport they're playing, and they're still arguing about that. Right. Hey, you're divorced now. Right. I can do whatever I want with my child. Hopefully we'll agree. Okay. But we're not married anymore. Right. And except for our children, everything else is separated. Right. Okay. And so the one place where we do want agreement is with the children. Right. Is our child going to play soccer or basketball, football or music? In those areas, we should agree. Right. But we are no longer a couple. Right. And so there will be disagreements. And so we need to have a way for dealing with that. And, so as we think about all these pieces together, we want to remember that focusing on what's best for the kids, that child-centered divorce process. Right. What we're doing is we're trying to make things smoother, less traumatic for the children, before, during, and after the divorce is finalized. And we have to be mindful that it doesn't necessarily make things easier for us. Right. It may be more challenging for us because we have to concede to some things that we don't necessarily want to concede to. That's right. But if it's best for the children, that's what we need to, that's the avenue that we need to take. And the child-centered approach certainly puts us into that direction. Right. Next week, we're going to talk about co-parenting. Right. And, once the divorce is over, now how are we co-parenting? How are we working together to keep that going? Right. Once we are doing that child-centered divorce process, and once we've been through that, how do we continue sort of the child-centered parenting in different homes? That's going to be what we talk about next week. Right. And just there's a little rule of thumb here. We frequently say you don't want to argue in front of your children. You don't want to fight in front of your children. When you're divorcing, you don't want to fight in front of the children. The same rule applies. Okay. So don't start fighting in front of your children as you're going through this divorce. Okay. That's not the time to begin that kind of arguing and that adversarial, that difficult adversarial relationship. We know the emotions are hot and the emotions are big. We know that. And that's why we say, get through the divorce as quickly as you can. because the quicker you get to a resolution, the quicker you get to a final signed document, the quicker you're going to recover and to begin the new life that you're going to have now. You're going to have a new life. You're going to start making new memories. But that process can't begin until this has been agreed to and the documents are signed and they're at the courthouse. Then you can begin your new life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right. I think that's it for today. Until next time, right? You're okay. You're good.
I think so. This is a difficult topic.
Definitely.
I'm just, my wheels are turning because we do a lot of family law here.
Yes.
And you know, these are very difficult times for parents, but they're always more difficult for kids.
Definitely. So, all right. Well, more on that next week. Until then, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.